Welcome everyone. My name is Alok and I'm your host for our 5G series podcast, Conversation from the Front. This is part one of the series, and today we are going to hear from two eminent leaders from telecom industry about the challenges and opportunities in the space of network analytics. I'm truly honored to share this space with Graham Baxter and Suresh Chintada. Let me take this opportunity to introduce both of them. Suresh, who is the CTO of Subex Limited, started his professional journey in 1992. He served Motorola for more than 2 decades, and he was part of the engineering leadership at Aris and CommScope. He's a firm believer and doer as far as innovation is concerned. In fact, he has as many as 7 patents to his name and is leading multiple initiatives at Subex in the area of AI and machine learning. Suresh, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Alok. Thanks for the introduction.
Our next guest is Graham Baxter. Graham, who's the director of Gravy Consulting, started his professional journey in 1987. He was head of network design and system infrastructure at Orange for nearly a decade. In his last corporate assignment, he served as chief operating officer at 3UK for more than 8 years. And before that, he served as CTO of 3UK for almost 4 years. Graham, who led multiple transformation initiatives of multi-billion euros at 3UK, has been a veteran in the telecom space. Graham, it's a pleasure to have you today.
Great. Thank you very much for your introduction, and hello to everybody.
Okay, so let me get started. Graham, you have been into the industry for almost more than 3 decades, right? If I reflect back from technology perspective, we had first deployment of 2G started in 1991 by Radio Lenja in Finland. 3G happened in 2001, and the first deployment was by NTT Docomo at Japan. 4G eventually took place a little bit, less than 10 years to come into the fray in 2009. The first deployment was done by Telia Sonera at Oslo, Norway, and Stockholm, Sweden. But didn't you witness all of those, Graham? I think our listeners would be really interested to hear from your perspective how you saw on ground the evolution of network analytics as we move from these technologies. Graham, over to you.
Yes, well, as you said in my intro, Alok, I did join Orange back in 1994. They were the fourth entrant into the UK market and launching a 2G network using the 1800 spectrum. And at the time, of course, 2G was very much about voice, circuit switched, and a little bit of SMS as well. So from a services perspective, not too complicated. And from a managing voice networks, relatively straightforward, doesn't require a huge amount of analytics. And you can manage these things through element management that comes with the equipment that you deploy in your network. I did see the introduction of GPRS, so this was data traffic onto the 2G network. But again, this was circuit switch and very low traffic volumes. I then moved to 3, and 3 was the fifth entrant into the UK market and was the first to deploy 3G. And of course, that introduced more bandwidth, new frequencies, more traffic, and more services. So now you're getting the introduction of packet data and also things like video services. So start becoming a little bit more challenging to manage that network effectively. And then I saw that evolve into the 4G network, which then saw all of the traditional circuit switched services transition across into a packet domain. And now you're starting to get a little bit more complexity, more traffic, more KPIs, more elements. Because one of the interesting things about these evolutions is that they don't replace the previous generation. So you add 2G, then you add 3G, then you add 4G, and the 2G and 3G remains. So you've got the additional radio access technologies to manage as well. So what I saw was some great evolutions in terms of services, traffic, and things like that, but more complexity for an operator to manage. And as I ran the engineering function at Three and at Orange, the challenge is how do you manage this increased complexity without expanding your engineering workforce in a sort of linear fashion? So how do you break that connect? And one thing I did find as we added more engineers to manage this increasing complexity is actually those engineers were spending more time doing the analytics, actually crunching data, and less time actually making decisions. So that was one of the big challenges that I saw as we progressed through the technologies.
Yeah, I mean, in fact, Graham, whatever you mentioned has been pretty relevant as far as my conversations with some of the customer goes. I think they bring the same point. It's in fact a huge cost as well as you add more resources to do such basics activities rather than focusing on some strategic part of the things, right? So, Suresh, I think that's where I feel, when I get a perspective from customers, they do explore and ask these questions, how these challenges can be solved. Maybe since when I introduced you, I knew that you have been leading many strategic initiatives as far as artificial intelligence and machine learning is concerned. Do you see a solution around that which can solve these problems which Graham witnessed, which we are hearing in the industry today?
Absolutely, Alok. I think Graham actually, brought a very great insight at what actually happens today on the ground, right? We have enough and more data being available to the engineers, right? And the kind of analytics they have access to today, right? But most of the existing approach, I believe, is siloed and it is driven by individual functions. Thus the network operations team, let's say, is analyzing data to understand and optimize the network performance, independent of a customer experience team looking at improving churn ratios, for example, right? While most forward-looking CSPs have started integrating the analytics across this entire data value chain, but to realize gains, it's often a complex and custom-built workflows that need to be built, requiring, of course, additional operational investments, right? So on one hand, I think the sheer volume and velocity of data will only increase multifold in the new era, right? And on the other, with the emergence of complex operating models involving cloud, NFEs, SDNs, and mixed ecosystems, are paving way to several digital transformation projects, right? The CSPs world over, I'm sure, are looking to simplify the operations by bringing in automation and reducing cost, right? One of the things I was looking at was, the autonomous networks are a stated goal for many of the complexity, many as the complexity multiplies, and right, and as the overall costs go up. Many operational roles, I believe, will migrate, right? From today, I think they're probably hands-on operations to newer roles, which probably will end up designing systems or using some form of an AI ML driven operations to automate network operations, right? That's what I firmly believe. Automated decision making and closed loop operations will become key success criteria for the future. And using AML driven predictive analytics to improve automation in network planning and design also sit very high on the list of categories for the operators to deal with in the new era, right? So, so with the maturing of the AML technologies in the last 3 to 4 years, and availability of modern platforms for data analytics, providing an end-to-end, visibility to the entire operations, I think it's only mandatory that 5G networks leverage AML technologies to simplify the network operations.
I think you raised again a very, very relevant insight that is probably happening in the industry. Graham, I'll get back to you on this. Suresh mentioned about various approaches through which the operations planning and optimization things that can be simplified. But didn't you do that in your transformation journey? You would have used multiple tools, Graham. How that landscape look like, Graham? Would you like to share something on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's good to hear from Suresh about the AI ML analytics capability, because I think historically a lot of the work done at the operations, particularly when you're aggregating data from various systems, is actually done in spreadsheets. It's quite manual. So I think moving to an automation way of working is really valuable and actually essential going forward. One thing I would say is that mobile networks are very complicated, and there's many different domains, and traditionally operators would have tooling in each of those domains. So you'd have a radio planning tool, and you'd have an element management tool, fault management tool, and performance management tool, each of which was managed by some experts in that particular domain. The challenge for the operator is that how do you manage the end-to-end customer experience? And this is where you need the aggregation of data to be able to correlate what's going on and understand the customer experience, because ultimately that's what you're trying to manage effectively. And you want your customer experience to be as good as it can be. One of the key challenges I saw, and maybe Suresh will be able to help with this one, is that all of those tools tend to be reactive. So you wait for an event to happen, like a fault, and then you react and try and fix it and make it better. But of course, from an operational point of view, you don't actually want the fault to occur in the first place, and you want to be able to plan these things out. So, one of the big challenges for operators is how do you be more proactive, and how do you visualize what's happening on the network? Because when you're looking at a sea of data, it's very hard to actually get your head around what's going on and what does that actually mean. So I think there's a couple of questions for Suresh. So Alok, I'm sort of stealing your questions here, but that certainly for me would be a pressing questions to answer from an operator perspective.
Suresh, over to you.
All right. Okay. I think listening to Graham, you understand how siloed, and it's not the lack of tools. I think it's not the lack of data, I think, that we have today. But I think given the siloed nature of today's operations and the complex tool set that Graham alluded to, I think it's only imperative that a more holistic approach is needed to decision making to enable the goal of these autonomous networks. Right. Here, I would like to spotlight maybe one or two techniques which can form basis for automating some of this decision making. Right. I would like to speak about what if analysis. I think what if analysis, if you understand, is a data intensive simulation whose essential goal is to inspect the behavior of complex systems under some certain given scenarios, right? What is new is integration of this simulation with the AI components, right? That can be directly embedded in the simulation model to allow testing and forecasting. So what happens with that is, an increased accuracy, right, of automation, plus the ability to make faster decision making, just becomes available to you. A digital twin is a very good example application of embedding AI within a what if scenario, right? So what does it do, right? A what if analysis provides a very powerful paradigm for CSPs to parse the complex operations and to simplify decision making, right? Again, if I have to look at what does it mean for us when we're looking at the new 5G era, right? As we move to 5G, we have to move from a network analytics so far, network analytics bounded to a certain function and an operation, to probably move to a paradigm of network intelligence, which kind of spans across different silos within the operator domain, right? So in where you operate, where you work with data across the silos, whether it's network, it's financial, it's customer experience, etc., right? And use machine learning models to make sense of the data that cannot be analyzed using existing statistical models, right? And translate this analysis to make an accurate forecast, and using what if simulations to enable better investment decisions or optimization strategies.
I think, Suresh, this is getting very interesting. In fact, you touched base upon what if simulation. And in fact, one of the very common question that comes from customer, can you help me simulate what happens when I launch something like massive MIMO into the network, right? So I'll hold that for a moment. I'd like to steer this conversation to a technology which is not just evolutionary in nature, but a revolutionary one as well. 5G. Graham, your thoughts, how network analytics would change in 5G era?
Well, in some ways, I would say that it is a bit of an evolution from where we've had. I've talked about going from 2G to 3G to 4G. And every time you're adding a radio access technology and you're getting more traffic and you're getting more elements to manage, getting more KPIs, getting more customers. And the same is true for 5G. So you're adding 5G and those things hold true. But I would say some of the things that are different is that I think for the first time, we're starting to see some of the older technologies get phased out. So, for example, turning off 2G and turning off 3G, and then how you manage the transition of your customers onto the newer technologies in a seamless way, and how you plan for that, that requires a new set of analytic capability. And 5G is introducing some really fascinating new dimensions to the services. So, for example, the massive development of Internet of Things. So now we need to think about customers not just as people with their mobile phones and tablets, etc., but also now you've got a massive number of machines out there that can be connected to the network. Introducing very low latency. So now thinking about low latency services, thinking about enterprises and potentially slicing the network into different domains for different purposes. All of this adds quite a significant amount of complexity for an operator. So firstly, how do you manage that? How do you make sure that each of these new services is getting the experience that they require? And how do you ensure the reliability? So I think it's really good to hear Suresh talk about the what-if scenarios. I think they're going to become an essential part of planning effectively for a 5G network.
Yeah, Graham, I think you once again touched, in fact, I would agree that complexity is going to multifold in 5G era because of various reasons that you just mentioned. Suresh, I know this will be in line with what you just mentioned from what if simulation, but if I have to take complexity as a main problem statement, right? How would AI/ML would be able to resolve it? Just a couple of insights on that. From your side would be great. I know you covered a bit from 4G perspective, but from 5G, if you can be a bit, specific on this area, that will be great for our listener to hear about.
Sure. I think what Graham talked about in terms of the 5G, right? I think you understand what it does is it kind of multiplies the complexity from what you have seen in the 4G, right? And what it also means at a level where we are trying to, let's say if I'm focusing on analytics, right? It also means that we have a lot more data today that we can look at and understand, right? And of course, we also have a lot more tools to use to parse the data and to see what kind of insights we get, right? But I think that's not the problem, right? I think the question still remains is, what are the good questions to ask, right? What are the insights we're looking for, right? That's why I think why all analytics are not equal, right? Why I think it's also important to ask the right questions. So I think it's the same thing even with 5G, with the complexity that is there, right? So one of the things that I was reading about 5G was this aspect of zero touch provisioning of networks, right? Wherein you need to understand customer experience analytics and link that to network planning and provisioning to improve the churn ratios and lifetime values of the customers in the network. I alluded some time back about how in a siloed networks, how you look at these two things separately, look at those analytics independently and then try to build an optimization solution based on those silos. But what happens with the 5G, with the complexity that is around us, it's also imperative, as I said earlier, that we bring in a holistic approach to looking at these things, right? So if I'm talking about a zero touch provisioning of network, I'm actually talking about, looking at two aspects, two dimensions of the network, a customer experience dimension and the network planning dimension, and trying to see how I can have one solution that optimizes that, right? So while reactive analytics help you optimize existing systems and processes, what I believe is predictive analytics should help create and improve planning, so you establish optimal systems and processes on day one, right? I think that's what we are going towards, right? I do understand as we are migrating from 4G to 5G, I think it'll be a while we completely switch off 4G and move completely to 5G, right? There will be aspects where I think we need to understand how those optimizations need to cross those boundaries, right? So forecasting is an important aspect of strategic planning. There are several models that exist, including both qualitative and quantitative models to help make faster decisions, right? And to evaluate future trends and their impact, I think enterprises need reliable and predictive analytical systems to optimize some of these decisions. And that's where again, the machine learning models will come in. That's where even the what if analysis and scenarios will come in. And of course, end-to-end data value chains, right? Using that, one can accurately forecast to help enable faster and automated decision making. By converging this domain and expertise and data science, right? A forecast model tuning will only become much more simpler with the right tool sets available, right? So what I believe is an automated system of what if simulations is probably the need of the hour to make this to take the complexity out of the whole equation, Alok.
So in short, you're saying it's going to be zero touch network analytics, Suresh, right?
Yeah, you probably said that, summarized it well. Alok.
So for all our listeners, let me add this concept of what if simulation and reducing the complexity and improving the customer experience in the 5G era. Subex has been doing many innovative stuffs, and one such area that Subex is involved in is in a TM forum catalyst towards 5G digital marketplace. Uh, Today we had this honor to listen from the leaders what has happened and what is anticipated, how things will be done. We will cover that in detail in our part two of this series, and therein we'll listen to both these eminent leaders and look into solving some of the real world challenges. So please stay tuned for that. I look forward to host that session for you guys, and I look forward to hear Graham and Suresh again. And that time we'll probably steer the conversation around some of the solutions, how to solve whatever we discussed today. What are some of the approaches, the innovation that has been done by various players collaborating in this space, how these challenges are solved. So really appreciate your time. I hope our listeners enjoyed the show as much as I. It was an honor for me to host both of you, and I look forward to the part two of this series. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Alok. Thanks, Graham.